PFASs that contaminate their gear. They demand we do better at firefighting at our airports. It's an honor to meet with them. We welcome to Ottawa, and we thank them for their work every single day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, the death of a seemingly perfectly healthy 43 years old affected many in the Brampton community, including me. He was one of my most beloved friends. Coming without warning, with no chance to say goodbye, the news of his death was shocking and heartbreaking. Ravjot Singh Chatwal was a hard-working division chief in Brampton's Fire and Emergency Services, where flags flew at half-mast to mark his passing. A proud Sikh, Ravjot was a role model and a champion for equity, diversity, and inclusion. He was a community builder, ever helpful, kind-hearted, caring, and thoughtful, winning friends with his infectious smile and sense of humor. I hope you will join me in offering our condolences to Ravjot's family, friends, and co-workers. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Simcoe Grey.
Mr. Speaker, about 1 in 12 Canadians have a rare disease, and sadly, most of them are children. 40% of patients do not have access to appropriate drugs for their condition. On average, it takes 3.7 years and 3 wrong diagnoses until they even know what disease they have. When they do find out, it takes 2 years on average for public reimbursement for their medicine. And that's if they're fortunate enough to have it covered or even available here in Canada. But there are people working hard to make a change. This includes 2 passionate and tireless advocates here today from New Tecumseh, Maddie and Beth Vanstone, who are working hard with the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders to improve access to rare disease drugs. The government needs to do more to address the needs of rare disease patients, and I'm happy to lend my support. Let's all get behind Canadians struggling to access basic care for their rare diseases.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, every Canadian deserves to get the health care they need whenever and wherever they need it. But right now, our healthcare system is not living up to the promise due to outdated technology, lack of access to family doctors, and long wait times. Hence, many Canadians are feeling left behind. I am glad the federal government has announced $199 billion in additional federal funding to provinces to improve healthcare for Canadians. When we sign agreement with the province of Ontario for this additional fund transfer, we should ensure we deliver real results for Canadians. The agreement must make sure Canadians have access to family doctors, insist on real plans to reduce wait times, and people get good mental health care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député. The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in this House to mark the 20th anniversary of the musical group Le Vent du Nord. This group is known for its depth, its passion, and its generosity. They interpret tunes taken from the traditional repertoire and also draw inspiration from that to compose their own original songs filled with poetry and historical references. We know how difficult it can be to make a living from culture in Quebec, but this group, made up of Nicolas Boulris, Simon Baudré, André Brunet, Régent Brunet, and Olivier Demers, has been able to survive and keep on touring all these years. In 20 years, they produced 12 albums, over 2,000 concerts on 4 continents, and won numerous awards, including 2 Junos and 3 Felixes at the ADISC Gala. Not only have they become an essential part of Quebec's traditional music scene, they're also a driving force behind it and a source of influence for Quebec on the international scene. Congratulations on your 20 years of making Quebec and the rest of the world vibrate. You have my admiration. The Honourable Member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, my riding of Bourassa distinguished itself at the Canada Games in February. Young people from the Quebec Karate Center of Excellence, under the direction of François Persicot, won half the medals for Quebec. I'm proud to introduce you to these 4 young people aged 14 to 17 in the combined program of sports and studies. I had the honor of presenting them with a certificate of merit for their sporting prowess. Abdelassam Kardousi, top 7 combat. Mohamed Sherif Ilbouch, bronze medal. Marwa Moqdad, silver medalist, and Anton Gurin, a young Ukrainian who just got permanent residence in Canada, the sole gold medalist for Quebec in karate. All my congratulations to these young people who make us so very proud. Thank you.
Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Firefighters from across Canada are in Ottawa this week for the 30th Legislative Conference of the International Association of Firefighters. As a retired firefighter and former president of Markham Local 2727, I know firsthand just how important these next few days of advocacy will be for firefighters and their families. In the coming days, MPs from all parties will hear about the increase in occupational illnesses like cancer among firefighters, including the need to remove PFAS from firefighting gear now being linked to cancer and other serious health effects. There will also be a discussion for federally regulated airports in Canada to meet ICAO standards. Under the leadership of President Ed Kelly, the IAFF is laser focused on protecting the health and safety of its 334,000 members and their families, both here in Canada and in the United States. On behalf of our Conservative team, to my former colleagues in Markham, to the Barrie and Innisfil firefighters and all firefighters who've come to Ottawa this week, welcome. We hear you, we respect you, and we're here for you and your families.
The Honourable Member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to show my support for the people of Iran following several troubling reports. In the past 3 months, over 50 schools in Iran have reported cases of schoolgirls impacted by alleged poisonings, followed by much concern of the effects that this will have on their education and their future. Despite lacking information on the details of these despicable attacks, due to the substantial number of journalists recently detained by the regime, many citizens, especially women and girls, continue to show unwavering bravery and work to protest their current environment. While the Iranian regime continues to ignore the rights of its citizens amid these despicable reports, we recognize that it is imperative for everyone to take a stand to protect the fundamental rights of women and girls and citizens in Iran. Canadians across the country continue to support the families that deserve true justice, and we pray for all of those affected. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mississauga Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for that. I am honored to salute a hardworking and inspirational Portuguese Canadian, Sr. Bento de São José, who passed away on March 1st, 2023. Sr. Bento was a pioneer who opened doors for many immigrants in the early 60s. He'll be remembered for his courageous spirit that took him through a war in Africa before making Canada home. He'll fondly be remembered for his never-ending enthusiasm, the social well-being of our community, and the entrepreneurial drive for commerce and social improvements. He found opportunity in Toronto in 1963, and with a bright and savvy mind, forged a successful car dealership and service center. Many of us bought our first cars from Bentos. He was a brave leader who also engaged in politics to elevate our community and leave a positive impact at all levels of government. He's been recognized by Portuguese authorities and Canadian veterans with many honors of merit and medals. His achievements will forever be applauded. His greatness will never be forgotten. Always in our hearts. Rest in peace, Sr. Bento.
The honourable member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, for the past 20 weeks, Canadians have heard over and over again about the help from the Beijing communists that this Liberal Party has received in multiple elections. Conservatives have asked hundreds of questions in the House, but the Prime Minister has told us much of nothing. We've asked questions at committees, and the Liberal members have done everything they can to delay, distract, and undermine the need for a thorough investigation into this topic. At the beginning of this month, 67% of Canadians supported an open and public independent inquiry that would help provide serious transparency in this matter. All opposition parties voted in favor of the motion to launch such an inquiry, but as always, the Liberal MPs voted against it. Canadians are losing trust in our political institutions and democracy. Mr. Speaker, I call on Canadians who watch this to call, email, and visit their local Liberal MPs, reminding them that they are in this House to represent them and not to blindly serve the self-interest of this Prime Minister and the Liberal Party. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so pleased to rise in honor of Dartmouth Cole Harbour's Marie Jones. In her 40s, while raising multiple children, Marie attended Dalhousie University in the Masters of Arts program, focusing on education. Her cutting-edge research focused on how the testing and streaming of students at that time was prejudiced against children living in poverty. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, just before completing her degree, Marie's eldest son, David, became serious.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. I understand the translation is not working. Ça vient de Parfait. I'll ask the honourable member to start over so that everyone can hear what he has to say. The honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, I am so pleased to rise in honor of Dartmouth Cole Harbour's Marie Jones. In her 40s, while raising multiple children, Marie attended Dalhousie University in the Masters of Arts program, focusing on education. Her cutting-edge research focused on how the testing and streaming of students at that time was prejudiced against children living in poverty. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, just before completing her degree, Marie's eldest son, David, became seriously ill. Marie left her studies to research, advocate, and care for him. He passed away a decade later. Despite adversity, Marie continues to give back, from caring for elderly relatives while she raised her kids, teaching those who needed her help, to advocating for music programs and increased funding for long-term care homes. Nothing stops Marie Jones. I am honored, Mr. Speaker, today in Canada's House of Commons to announce that at the age of 92, Marie Jones has finally been awarded her master's degree from Dalhousie University. Congratulations, Marie.
The honourable member for Pitt Meadows Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, in Greater Vancouver, the dream of buying a home or even renting an affordable place has become a nightmare under this Liberal government. The Liberals don't care. They won't take any responsibility for the mess they've created. Reckless spending and the irresponsible doubling of our national debt has lit an inflationary fire. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, price of housing has skyrocketed. To compensate for their spending, the Bank of Canada has raised interest rates by 1,700% in just 1 year. Families will be forced to spend thousands more when mortgage renewal comes. Whether you're renting, a first-time home buyer, or a homeowner, Conservatives will fight to ensure housing is affordable for you. Mr. Speaker, a change of government can't come soon enough.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has led the Liberal government for 8 years now, supported by a costly coalition with the NDP. For a whole generation of young Canadians, the cost of living has never been higher, and their hopes of building a life like their parents are dwindling every day. In Canada, home ownership was an accessible dream for people back in 2016, but the Liberal government their inflationary spending is putting that dream out of reach. 9 out of 10 young people think they'll never be able to afford a house because mortgage payments have doubled in the 8 years since this prime minister was elected. More and more people from the poorest to middle-class families are turning to food banks because their paychecks are no longer enough to cover the rising cost of food. The prime minister needs to come back down to earth and listen to the people who tell him it's time to fix things up. Budget 2023 must end inflationary spending, allow Canadians to take home more money with their paycheck, lower prices by eliminating tax increases, and remove government barriers to allow housing construction. It's called common sense, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Orleans. Mr. Speaker, I have the privilege of representing a community of active and engaged seniors. So I was proud to attend the monthly breakfast of the Orleans Francophone Seniors Group, the RAFO, on March 19th to announce financial assistance of nearly $100,000 from the Community Spaces Fund, which provides funding to official language minority communities for renovation projects, among other things. The RAFO was able to undertake major renovations for greater energy efficiency and a better space for its over 600 members. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to recognize here in this place 3 New Orleans centenarians. That's right, Mr. Speaker, 3 exceptional women are celebrating their 100th birthday this year. Let's all congratulate Thérèse Gagné, Germaine Dumoulin, and Henriette Comeau. Happy birthday, ladies.
The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, as we electrify our energy systems, batteries will become more important. But they have lifespans, and recycling will become an even more critical part of our future. And I'm proud to say that the City of Trail has become one of the biggest battery recycling hubs in North America. One company in Trail, Retrieve Technologies, now part of Cirba Solutions, has been recycling all kinds of batteries for years. If you bring your used batteries to any recycling center in British Columbia, they will end up at Retrieve producing valuable products such as cobalt cake and lithium salts. Next door is KC Recycling, the biggest lead acid battery recycling facility in Western North America. Lead acid batteries, the batteries in all gas-powered cars and trucks in the world, are completely recyclable. Much of the lead from KC goes directly back into the Teck smelter and Trail. Yes, all batteries can be recycled, and the City of Trail is leading the way to the circular economy of the future.
The honourable member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, last week, my friend, actress, director, and producer Louisette Dussault passed away. In addition to her many roles and accomplishments, she was involved as president of the Conseil québécois du théâtre and the Commission internationale de théâtre francophone. She contributed to the success of great Quebec works like Les Belles Sœurs and Demain Matin, Montréal Matin by the great Michel Tremblay. Committed to Quebec, she was part of the Women's Bus for Sovereignty. I remember her magnificent interpretation of Panis Angelicus, which she dedicated to me, and delivered with her beautiful soprano voice when she sponsored our Island Collective project. Our theater and screens owe her a lot. And what about the 750 episodes of Green Mouse, which has seduced hearts of all the children in Quebec? We've been singing it for 6 decades. We miss you. We love you, Green Mouse.
Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister's inflationary taxes and deficit spending, it no longer pays to work in Canada. 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals, and many are going to food banks just to survive. February marks the 7th consecutive month of double-digit food inflation. Rent and mortgage payments have doubled under this Liberal Prime Minister, and the dream of home ownership is quickly becoming a nightmare for many young people in this great country. A Conservative government will bring home powerful paychecks with lower taxes so that hard work pays off once again. Bring home lower prices by ending inflationary carbon tax and deficit spending that drive up inflation and create higher interest rates. it'll bring homes to Canada, to Canadians that they can afford by removing government gatekeepers and freeing up land and speeding up building permits. Enough is enough. It's time to make Canada work for those who do the work.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to welcome on Parliament Hill members of various organizations such as RENA, the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, Community Living Toronto, and many more who are joining us to advocate for affordable housing and support for Canadians with developmental disabilities. Through programs like the National Housing Strategy, it's essential that we're providing support for those with developmental disabilities so they can be fully included in our society with dignity, individuality, independence, personal growth, and community inclusion. RENA provides support across North York and the GTA, including a new third intentional community, the Francourt Family RENA Residence, which will provide affordable housing for an additional 154 individuals. I'd like to thank these amazing organizations for joining us and for all the transformative work they do in our communities, empowering those with developmental disabilities. In this country, our strategy is nothing without us. To the developmental disability community, we see you, we care about you, you enrich our society and our communities each and every day. Thank you.
Oral questions. Question orale. The honourable leader of the opposition.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister and his taxes and various costs and penalties, there's a war on work. A worker might lose up to 48 cents out of every dollar they earn. You work hard and then you're punished. Mr. Speaker, will this Prime Minister put an end to his war on work by cutting taxes to ensure that you actually earn the money you've worked for? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since 2015, we have shown that we care deeply about the middle class and those who are working hard to join it. That is how we've brought 435,000 children out of poverty thanks to the Canada Child Benefit. We have created 50,000 childcare spaces up to today by reducing costs by 50%. We have helped 230,000 kids access dental care, and we have added 2 million jobs to the economy by increasing women's participation rate by 3%. These are various measures that the Conservatives voted against, but here on this side of the House, we will continue delivering for Canadians.
What we voted against is the Prime Minister's war on work, with higher and higher taxes and clawbacks that punish people for working hard. In fact, a worker can lose as much as 88 cents on the next dollar he or she earns. There's no common sense in that, Mr. Speaker. Why would people work more to just give it over to this Prime Minister? Will the Prime Minister reverse his anti-work taxes, give Canadians a break so that hard work pays off and Canadians can bring home powerful paychecks?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the moment we first got elected in 2015, we put success for the middle class in this country at the heart of everything we do, which is why we delivered a Canada Child Benefit that lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty, why we've invested in clean energy and new jobs that have helped Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We've also delivered a Canada Workers Benefit that the Conservatives voted against that is supporting low-income workers and continuing to be more generous. We move forward on supports for dental and rental for low-income Canadians that Conservatives directly voted against. We will continue to be there for all Canadians, including workers.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The only place he's been is in the pockets of Canadian workers, taking away their money. He's raised taxes on paychecks, raised taxes on gas, raised taxes on home heating, raised taxes on food, raise taxes on small businesses. And what does he want to do this Saturday? He wants to raise taxes again. Mr. Speaker, inflation is at a 40-year high after 8 years of this Prime Minister. Canadians cannot afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. Will he show a little bit of restraint and commit in tomorrow's budget to no new taxes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've demonstrated every step of the way that we're there to support workers, that we're there to support Canadians, and that's exactly what we've done. When we lowered the small business taxes to record levels and even allowed larger growth from small businesses while continuing to benefit from those. We've continued to step up on supports for workers, continued to step up on supports for families, and that has created both economic growth that has benefited everyone as opposed to the trickle down that the Conservatives still push with tax breaks for the wealthiest, as we have continued to grow the economy in meaningful ways for everyone.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Is his. He wants to take away everybody's money, centralize it in his own hands, and promise that it will trickle down through his mighty bureaucracy and all of the prodigious interest groups that gobble it up. And there'll maybe be a few little drops that get down to the people who actually earned it in the first place. You know, when I first said deficits would cause inflation, all of the experts disagreed, and now they all agree with me. In fact, even the finance minister has now come around to my view, admitting that deficit spending causes inflation. That's why people are paying more than at any time in 40 years. Will he cap government spending and put an end to the inflationary deficits tomorrow?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Patel, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is still hoping and waiting for experts to endorse his plan to opt out of inflation by buying cryptocurrency, something that would have erased savings of Canadians. The fact is, tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, we're bringing forward a budget that is focused on affordability and supporting Canadians. It's going to be delivering healthcare results for Canadians right across the country and creating great jobs for the middle class in a clean and growing economy. Those are the focuses that we've been laser focused on over the past many years on Canadians. We will continue to step up and be there to grow the economy and support all Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The worst part of his inflationary policies are in the price of housing. We see now Vancouver's the third worst housing bubble in the world. Toronto is the 10th. They're worse than Manhattan, than Singapore, than London, England, and countless other places. And the average required down payment, rent, and mortgage payment have doubled under this prime minister. His inflationary policies have made life worse, and his gatekeeping friends prevent housing construction. Will he announce in tomorrow's budget serious penalties for those gatekeepers that drive up housing prices so that hardworking Canadians can bring homes they can afford? Thank you.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Speaker, we know Canadians are struggling with the cost of housing, whether it's a young family looking to buy their first home or a student looking for an affordable apartment near campus. This is why we've taken action on so many fronts, from helping Canadians save up for their first home to investing in building and repairing more homes, including supporting local governments to fast-track the creation of 100,000 new homes, providing support for low-income renters, which the Conservatives voted against, and ensuring houses are used as homes, not investment vehicles, by curbing unfair practices that drive up prices, including banning foreign home buyers and a federal anti-flipping rule. L'honorable député de La Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Let's talk about Chinese interference, Mr. Speaker. No, this government hasn't been able to sweep it under the rug. On Thursday, the House voted in favor of a public independent inquiry on Chinese interference. The Bloc Québécois, the NDP, the Conservatives are all in favor, and 72% of Canadians are for it. Even the member for Don Valley North is for it. Even the Liberal, who is facing the most serious allegations, is asking for an inquiry to cast light on this. When will the Prime Minister understand that the only defensible option is a public inquiry? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I take this very seriously. It is a non-partisan issue, or an issue that should never be partisan. That is why we have appointed an unimpeachable, non-partisan expert, the former Governor General, David Johnston, who will review this matter and decide whether to call for an inquiry or another type of investigation, and we will certainly implement his recommendations. 2 national security organizations will investigate the matter, and they will get to the bottom of it. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, I was forgetting that the Prime Minister is not the only one who doesn't want an inquiry. There's also his good friend, the Liberal Jean Chrétien, who also doesn't care about interference. Unless, and I'm quoting him, the ambassador or consul of China is running around with envelopes with cash in them. So according to Jean Chrétien, if there aren't any envelopes full of cash, apparently there's no reason to investigate what's happening to our democracy. Is that really the liberal ethical standard, Mr. Speaker? Does the Prime Minister like to see that his only ally against an independent inquiry is the father of the sponsorship scandal? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we can see here how the Bloc Québécois is trying to make this into a partisan issue, but it isn't. This is a serious matter that must be addressed impartially and independently. And that is exactly why we asked an extraordinary Canadian who has often proved his loyalty and service to the country. That is why we have asked him to oversee all necessary processes to get to the bottom of things and to ensure that Canadians know that we are doing everything we can to fight foreign interference. That is the serious approach that Canadians deserve, not partisan attacks.
For Burnaby South. Millennials in Canada are feeling the squeeze of inflation more than the rest of Canadians. In fact, the CBC article reports the trustee insolvency has concluded that Canadian millennials have been dealt a bad hand. And it's true. If you look at it, they got student debt, they've got bad credit card debt, and post-pandemic tax debt from collecting CERB. In fact, it means that more and more millennials are filing for bankruptcy. In the interest of generational fairness, will the Prime Minister confirm today there will be measures in the budget to give young Canadians a break?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the moment we first took office in 2015, our focus has been on supporting young people and supporting all Canadians. And we recognize, for example, that millennials are struggling with the cost of housing, whether it's a young family looking to buy their first home or a student trying to rent an apartment near campus. That's why we've been taking action on so many fronts. On housing, we've been helping Canadians save up for their first home. We've been investing in building and repairing more homes, including by supporting local governments to fast-track the creation of 100,000 new homes. We're providing support for low-income renters, which Conservatives voted against. We're ensuring houses are used as homes, not investment vehicles.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the cost of living is going up. It's harder and harder to make ends meet or to buy groceries. We learned recently that the government will announce a grocery rebate in the budget. So today, I would like to confirm that that rebate is the same thing as what we've been asking for a long time, to double the GST rebate. The Right Honourable Prime Minister, I know that all my colleagues here on all sides of the House are looking forward to seeing how we're going to help Canadians in tomorrow's budget, but they will have to wait, like everyone else, to see all the measures that we will be bringing forward. But I will say that we will be there to help with the cost of living. We will be there to help youth, seniors, and all workers with measures that will help during this difficult period, while ensuring that we also get results in our healthcare system and that we create good middle-class jobs in a greener and more sustainable growing economy.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
8 years of this Prime Minister's high taxes and higher government spending, 50% of insolvencies and bankruptcies are on the backs of our millennials, despite them only taking up a quarter of the population. They're borrowing at record deficits just to get by. And the dream of homeownership is dead for 9 out of 10 Canadian young people who say they'll never get into a home thanks to these Liberals. They'll make it even harder when they jack up their failed carbon tax on April the 1st. Will this Prime Minister today commit to no new taxes in tomorrow's budget so Canadians can get into housing?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, since forming government, our government has reduced poverty in this country by 56%. That's 2.7 million Canadians, mostly seniors and children, who are better off because of our government. We've done that by increasing investments in affordability, investments in things like childcare, like dental care, like healthcare, and we're well positioned for the future. With our debt to GDP ratio and our deficit lower than any other country in the G7, and Canadians themselves have produced over 830,000 jobs since the start of the pandemic.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Speaker, let's look look at the record of the most expensive housing minister in Canada's history. This genius spent $89 billion to give Canadians double the cost on mortgages and rents, and now it costs double just to save up for a home. These geniuses also made the cost of everything going into a house double, like gas, groceries, and home heating, and they're going to jack that up even further with their failed carbon tax on April the 1st. Again, will they commit to no new taxes in tomorrow's budget, yes or no?
I just want to remind the honorable members to use their language judiciously and just try to respect each other, not mock or criticize each other. The Honorable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I guess when you don't have much of a housing plan, you resort to gimmicks and buzzwords and attacks against your fellow colleagues. But, Mr. Speaker, what we have done from day one is focus on all Canadians in different spectrum of the housing sector, whether it is getting people off the street, building permanently affordable housing for those experiencing homelessness, building more deeply affordable housing for the most vulnerable, making sure that we're increasing the supply of new rentals, and yes, building more home ownership options for first-time home buyers. We've done all of that despite the party opposite voting against each and every measure, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, the cost of owning or renting a home in Canada has doubled. The cost of heating that home has doubled. The cost of getting groceries in Canada has gone up by double digits. And despite the inflation that Canadians are paying, and the surge in revenue that's actually creating for this government, their unnamed sources are conditioning Canadians for more spending and higher deficits in tomorrow's budget. So simple question, will the Prime Minister tell Canadians today that he, tomorrow, will not raise taxes on them?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to remind the member opposite that it was our government that actually reduced taxes for the middle class, not once, but twice. Reduced taxes for small businesses, not once, but twice. While inflation is a global phenomenon, we in Canada are very well positioned to take care of it. We have the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We have the lowest deficit in the G7, and that's going to allow us to continue to invest in Canadians, in good, sustainable, clean jobs, and making life more affordable.
Member for Thornhill.
Canadians have never paid higher taxes. More intervention, more bureaucracy, more spending, more debt. That created less productivity, less growth, and less for Canadians struggling to pay their bills. We have record credit card debt in this country. We have record food bank usage in this country, and record levels of stress and anxiety on people's finances. It seems that the Prime Minister's response is to raise taxes, as he plans to do on Saturday. The budget is tomorrow, and millions of Canadians who are out of money all want to know, will the Prime Minister commit to no new taxes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am very excited, as the member opposite is very excited for the release of the budget tomorrow. It's going to be an opportunity for us to continue doing what we've been doing, which is making life more affordable for Canadians, lowering taxes for middle-class Canadians, lower taxes for small business, which has allowed us to grow. And despite the fact that we have the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7, we're delivering programs like childcare, like healthcare, like dental care to make life more affordable for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, as you know, for 8 years, it seems like we're living in a new era where government budgets balance themselves. But in fact, this Prime Minister's financial mismanagement has led to a doubling of mortgages since 2015, high prices for food, and record credit card debt. Canadians know that you need to carefully plan your budget to pay your bills. Will the Prime Minister commit to not adding new taxes? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my colleague's question very much because, as he knows very well, inflation in Canada has gone down over the last 8 months consecutively. We also have the lowest deficit among G7 countries, and we also have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We have responsibly managed Canada's finances, and we have been there for Canadians during this difficult period to help them make ends meet. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the parliamentary secretary was in the same Twilight Zone episode as the Prime Minister when he said that budgets balance themselves. But we should recognize that the number of personal bankruptcies in Canada has gone up by 13.5% in January 2023, and business bankruptcies increased by 39.1% over 12 months. Canadians are suffering. Will the Prime Minister commit to not adding new taxes in tomorrow's budget? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my Conservative colleague that it's thanks to our programs and assistance that our businesses were able to get through the budget. That Canadians, that workers were able to keep their jobs during the pandemic. 8 out of $10 spent to help people during the pandemic were spent by the federal government, as well as on people's health. Mr. Speaker, we will be there for Canadians during this difficult period of global instability. We will ensure that Canadians can make ends meet. The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the budget will be tabled. And I would like to remind everyone that since 2021, this government has created 2 classes of seniors. It increased old age security, but only for people over 75. So it has left people between 65 and 74 in the lurch. Tomorrow's budget would be the ideal occasion to end this age-based discrimination between those who are senior enough and those who are not senior enough to deserve proper quality of life. Inflation would not make that distinction. Will this government finally correct the injustice that it created itself? The Honourable Minister for Families. Mr. Speaker, this government took strong action to help seniors in Canada. Unlike the Conservatives, who wanted to raise the retirement age to 67, we kept it at 65. Moreover, we ensured that for the most vulnerable seniors, we increased benefits by 10%. And in addition, for people over 75, we increased old age security by 10%. We are there for seniors in this country, and we will continue to help them. The Honourable Member for Beauport, Île-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, the budget is tomorrow, but no one is talking about EI, and yet delays have increased everywhere in Quebec. People who are unemployed have been waiting in vain for months without answers or benefits, and that's for people who even qualify, because many people in the regions with seasonal work don't get anything. The federal government is leaving them to fend for themselves. Will the budget give some answers to this bureaucratic fiasco? And will we finally have an in-depth reform to help these workers that are being allowed to fall through the cracks? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Currently one of the oldest and most complex systems across the Government of Canada. That's why we made a commitment to fully modernize the system. In the past 2 years, the Minister has led more than 35 virtual national and regional roundtables with workers, employers, and academics. EI reform is a priority, Mr. Speaker. We are on it, and we will get it done. Thank you.
Good job.
L'honorable député de Repentigny.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, this government promised to end fossil fuel subsidies by 2023. Now it is 2023, Mr. Speaker. And tomorrow, as you know, is the federal budget. So you will probably guess what my question is. It's very simple. Will the Minister of the Environment confirm that this budget will not include a single red cent in new direct or hidden subsidies to the oil industry? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. As she knows, last year we eliminated international subsidies to fossil fuels. That's billions of dollars that we are now investing in clean technology. And we have also committed to eliminating all fossil fuel subsidies by the first half of 2023, and we will do that. Thank you.
Member for Foothills.
Recent surveys show that only 2% of Canadian farmers believe the Liberals are doing a good job supporting agriculture. That shouldn't come as a surprise, as the Liberals are increasing the carbon tax on April 1st and imposing their farm-killing carbon tax on Atlantic Canadians on July 1st. The food price index says when the Liberals triple their carbon tax, it will cost an average Canadian farmer $150,000 a year. There are very real consequences to these carbon tax hikes. It is driving up costs on farmers, which is then driving up food costs for Canadian families. Will the Prime Minister commit to no new taxes?
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, our government is here to support our agricultural producers. We are helping them during this transition to increasingly sustainable agriculture. We know that our producers are doing everything they can to protect their farm's future and to pass them on to their children. We will continue to support them. We are supporting them with the Canadian Partnership for Sustainable Agriculture. We are increasing the amount we're providing by millions of dollars.
Foothills.
What the Liberals are providing is increases in taxes, and they have to understand that there are very real consequences to those tax hikes, and Canadians are paying the price. Pastas up 23%, lettuce 20%, apples up 16%. And the Liberals want to drive food costs even higher by increasing the carbon tax on April 1st. All this does is drive more Canadians to the food bank. The Daily Bread Food Bank in Toronto saw the visits quadruple in March. And the staff at that food bank said the numbers they are seeing are startling and horrific. Will the Prime Minister commit to no new taxes on Canadian families so they can afford to put food on their own table?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, I've been sitting in this chamber for the last 7.5 years, as many of my colleagues on the other side have as well. And what I remember is that we have put several measures on the floor here that have helped Canadian families that they in fact voted against. So whether it was the middle class tax cut reduction, whether it was the reduction for small business taxes for small businesses, whether it's the increase to the Canada Child Benefit that gives 9 out of 10 Canadian families more money tax-free that they voted against and lifted 450,000 children out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, we have been there for Canadians, will continue to be there for Canadians. We just hope the members opposite, if they're sincere.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses are struggling in this inflationary environment. Borrowing costs and bankruptcies are both up. Most economists agree that we are on the verge of a recession. And this government's response to increase taxes on April 1st that will hurt small business owners. The carbon tax increases inflation and has a significant effect on small businesses that cannot pass on those costs to their customers. And the government is indifferent to these effects. Will the Prime Minister commit to no new taxes for small business owners in tomorrow's budget?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I thank the member opposite for that question because it allows us to outline the important initiatives we've taken over these last 7.5 years. What we've done is put in place measures that actually help alleviate the burden that are on small business owners in this country. On 2 occasions, we've lowered the small business taxes, the same entities that member is advocating for, and on both of those occasions, he and every member of his party voted against those measures. What we also did during the COVID pandemic, at the height of the pandemic, is implement a series of measures targeted towards wage supports and loan supports for those very same small businesses. Surely that is something that we can all get behind. Yet again, the voting record of the party opposite speaks for itself. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood, Transcona.
Mr. Speaker, we've known for a long time now that CERB debt incurred by desperate people at the height of the pandemic would disrupt Canada Child Benefit payments that people rely on to feed and clothe their children. Liberals are quick to say, don't worry about it. We'll deal with this on a compassionate case-by-case basis. How is it compassionate for families to be surprised by an $800 shortfall in their monthly revenue? And how is it compassionate for parents now worried about their rent check bouncing to have to sit on the phone for days just for a chance to beg the CRA for relief? Real compassion requires a policy of CERB debt amnesty for low-income Canadians. When is the government going to do it?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
When the pandemic hit, we acted quickly to get recovery benefits into people's bank accounts without delay. To achieve that goal, we plan to verify eligibility in the back end after the fact. This approach kept workers attached to their jobs and positioned our economy to come roaring back. Lower income workers and groups most impacted by the pandemic were able to benefit from all of our programs. Mr. Speaker, we did the right thing. We will continue to have the backs of Canadians, low-income Canadians and workers. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
The Liberals secretly negotiated a deal to shut down the entire Canada-US border with an invisible wall. This will only drive persecuted asylum seekers on a more dangerous pathway. Sadhu Mohammed, a LGBTQ man, nearly died crossing irregularly to Canada in the dead of winter. His asylum claim was found to be valid, and he got his Canadian citizenship just this year. If this policy applied then, he would have been sent back to Ghana to face discrimination and violence for being who he is. Why are the Liberals taking a page?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say thanks to the member for questions, but I also want to reiterate an announcement that we made Friday, actually, that we finally have updated the Safe Third Country Agreement. So the agreement now applies to the entire Canada-US border, Mr. Speaker, and on top of that, we will be welcoming 15,000 people from Americas to promote safe and orderly migration. Mr. Speaker, this is a major victory for Canada.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Armenian Canadian community in my riding of Scarborough, Agincourt, and beyond are concerned by the rising tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh. It has now been more than 100 days since the start of the Latin corridor blockade. There is a growing humanitarian crisis, and Armenians in the Nagorno-Karabakh are fearing that the conflict may soon escalate. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs please inform the House about our government's efforts on this important issue?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague for an important question. I share the concerns of Armenian Canadians and Armenians in the Nagorno-Karabakh. We continue to call on Azerbaijani authorities to reopen the Latin corridor. We need to prevent the worsening of the humanitarian crisis. Canada supports the 2020 ceasefire agreement, including the return of Armenia prisoners of war. It is important that the ceasefire, which is supported by the EU monitoring group, be respected. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, the Governor of the Bank of Canada warned that the recent pause on interest rates was dependent on limited government spending. Excuse my skepticism, Mr. Speaker, but Conservatives know when Canadians have seen and they've witnessed record uncontrolled deficit spending. Will this government in tomorrow's budget commit to no new spending, or will they continue their reckless tax and spend policy, risking higher inflation and more interest rate hikes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our plan is not just making life more affordable for Canadians, it is also fiscally responsible. Canada has reconfirmed our AAA credit rating. We have recovered 126% of jobs lost during the pandemic, while the United States has only recovered 114%. We have the lowest deficit, the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7. This positions us very well going into the next budget to get inflation under control, improve affordability, and create sustainable, clean jobs.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives know that every dollar this government spends is another dollar out of Canadians' pockets. This is a dollar that could have been spent on groceries as Canadians line up for food banks. This is a dollar that could have been spent for a down payment on a new house. Instead, Canadians are struggling to pay their rent. When will this government finally give Canadians a break and reduce their taxes on the carbon and on beer and on wine and on spirits? Will this government finally commit to no new taxes in tomorrow's budget?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
One thing that Canadians listening at home know is that $1 invested by this government is providing opportunities across this country, Mr. Speaker. Canadians have seen that in biomanufacturing, for example, when we have Moderna in our country. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are seeing that we're attracting the likes of Volkswagen in our country to build our ecosystem and the battery ecosystem, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are seeing that we have record investment in this country, and one thing they trust is that we'll continue to invest in their future because that's what we need for the economy of the 21st century.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 8 years under this inflationist Prime Minister, I'd like the Prime Minister to listen to what Guy Parent, a trucker, has to say. He says, the companies that are hit with taxes, they pass those taxes on to the customers. It's the end customer who pays. And they say that all Quebecers will be affected. Everything is going to cost more. Raw materials, produce, televisions. Mr. Speaker, the question is simple. Will the Prime Minister commit to not raising taxes tomorrow? Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to clarify to my honourable colleague that the federal carbon tax does not apply to Quebec because they use a different system. I would be happy to provide him with all of the information necessary for him to give proper information, correct information to his constituents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the truckers who transport the food we eat here are going to pay more because of the carbon tax starting on April Fool's. And that's not an April Fool's joke, Mr. Speaker. That's the truth. On April 1st, the carbon tax is going up. The tax on beer, wine, and spirits is going up as well. People are going to be paying more for everything, and they're already stretched thin. So my question is simple. Will the Prime Minister commit to not raising taxes tomorrow for Canadians? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to remind my honourable colleague that the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that currently 8 out of 10 Canadians are receiving more money from the carbon tax from the federal government, where the federal carbon tax applies, than it costs them. So we're able to recycle a lot of that. And the remaining 10% of the carbon tax we use to reinvest in small, medium, and large companies to help them reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, after 6 years of tirelessly calling for the closure of Roxham Road, after having repeated hundreds of times that we shouldn't be greeting asylum seekers with RCMP officers, after having said over and over that Quebec does not have the capacity to receive these migrants, finally, Mr. Speaker, finally, Roxham Road has been closed. This is good news, and it should have been done a long time ago. But before we celebrate, we should read the fine print. The devil is always in the details, Mr. Speaker. So when does the government intend to make public the new Safe Third Country Agreement it signed with the United States? In full, with all of the details. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for his question. I hope that he heard the speech President Biden gave last week. Once again, Canada and the US have announced an update to the Safe Third Country Agreement. That's great news, Mr. Speaker. This new agreement will allow us to better manage asylum seekers in both of our countries and to ensure a fair and compassionate system. This is a shared responsibility, and it's a responsibility that Canada assumes. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Yes, I was there for Mr. Biden's speech. I understand the Liberals are proud of their achievement. Well, we're happy too with this development, but there are many questions that remain unanswered. Starting, let's talk about Mr. Pierre Gay, who owns the land around Roxham Road. He probably has a lot of questions. He's a generous donor to the Liberal Party. He signed leases valued at $28 million for land and facilities that Ottawa will no longer need because Roxham Road is closed. So, will the government break those leases and get the millions of dollars back? Or will it give a very generous gift to one of its loyal donors? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my Bloc colleague that all of the time he was asking questions in this House, he was asking us to suspend the agreement. So let's be clear. And I just want to put this on the record today. The government of Quebec, Mr. Speaker, welcomed this news about the new agreement. So if the Bloc isn't quite sure about what's happening in Quebec, maybe he should join the Quebec government in supporting this new agreement. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Tobic-Mactaquac.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, whether it be our seniors on fixed incomes fighting the ever-rising cost of living or families experiencing punishing fuel and grocery costs, or our farmers, producers and transporters who literally keep our land, grow our food, and haul our goods. Canadians are being crushed by soaring input costs, including the ineffective and punitive carbon tax. Canadians from coast to coast are desperate for some relief in the budget tomorrow. Will the Prime Minister get off their backs and commit to no new taxes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Seniors.
Yet another day, another Conservative stands up and pretends to care about seniors. Just in case that member forgets how many times the official opposition has forgotten about seniors and voted against them, let me remind them. GIS for single seniors, they voted against an increase. They voted against increasing the OAS for those 75 and over. They voted against providing rent relief for vulnerable Canadians. Mr. Speaker, they stand up on a regular basis. I'm looking forward to seeing how they vote in the budget when we do more things for all Canadians, including seniors.
Well done. The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, former Bank Governor Steve Poloz now says that Liberal deficit spending drove up inflation. The current Bank Governor said the same thing last fall. If he won't listen to us, maybe the Prime Minister will listen to the bank governors. Inflationary Liberal spending and taxes drive up the cost of everything. People can't afford to eat or even heat their homes. And to make matters worse, now they're going to triple the carbon tax. Simple question, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister commit to no new taxes?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we know that inflation has been challenging for Canadians. That's why we focused a legislative agenda that makes life more affordable for Canadians. But it is important for members opposite and everybody in this House, Canadians across the country, to understand that this is a global phenomenon. Unfortunately, inflation has been coming down. It's down to 5.2%. It's much lower than our peer economies, such as the United States or in Europe. It's actually positioning us quite well to invest in further measures that will make life more affordable, but will also make an economy that works well for everybody.
The Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Reckless spending, record debt, and tax increases is a result of 8 years of this Prime Minister. With the cost of living climbing higher and higher and the economic outlook more bleak than ever, many Canadians are at their breaking point. In tomorrow's budget, this government should reassure all Canadians that they will stand behind them, exhibit some fiscal responsibility, and help restore stability in this country. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister commit to canceling the planned carbon tax hike and no new taxes in tomorrow's budget?
The Honourable Minister of Information.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for a question, but I'm surprised she's not talking about the record of our government for 8 years, Mr. Speaker. Just this morning, a company just here in Ottawa, Renovis, announced $100 million of investment in the top semiconductor in the world, Mr. Speaker. We're becoming the Silicon Valley of the North. Not only they're going to be the most powerful, but they're going to be the greenest in the world. That's how investment is translating into jobs and jobs into growth. That's the way forward, Mr. President.
The Honourable Member, l'Honourable Député de Châteauguay.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay. Mr. Speaker, we're almost halfway through tax season. As members of Parliament, we have a special responsibility to help our constituents, especially those from vulnerable populations, to file their tax returns so that they can receive the benefits and entitlements that they deserved. Can the Minister of National Revenue inform this House what we can do to help them? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Châteauguay for her excellent question. Mr. Speaker, during tax season, I want to mention that every riding has a number of free tax clinics that every year help hundreds of thousands of Canadians fill out their tax forms. I would invite my colleagues to promote these tax clinics in order to help their constituents get the credits and tax benefits that they're entitled to. And I also want to take this time to thank the volunteers for the incredible work that they do in their community.
The Honourable Member for King Vaughan.
Speaker, we have a shortage of affordable housing across Canada that seniors are unable to qualify for. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, housing has become unaffordable. Rent has skyrocketed. Shirley is already struggling to pay for the 11% increase in grocery prices, and cannot afford to pay for her rent. Will this Prime Minister listen to our seniors, show some compassion, and commit to no new taxes?
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Assure the honourable member that seniors are actually a priority population in the National Housing Strategy. We've invested billions of dollars to make sure that vulnerable groups, including seniors, have access to safe and affordable housing that meets their needs. In addition to that, seniors are eligible for the Canada Housing Benefit, in addition to the top-up that the Conservative members of Parliament voted against. Not only did they vote against that help for seniors, they actually played procedural games in this House to delay that help that seniors needed to pay the rent.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough Kawartha.
Imagine being $200 away from bankruptcy. Well, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, most Canadians, in fact, half of all Canadians, don't have to imagine it because that is their reality. The cost of living crisis is destroying families across this country. Housing has doubled under this Prime Minister, and the out-of-control food costs are forcing people to skip meals. Andrea wrote to me and said, we normally skip lunch, even my 3 kids, because I just can't afford 3 meals a day right now.
Wow.
Mr. Speaker, we have a chance right now, today, the Prime Minister, it is long overdue, to show compassion, to actually support Canadians. So will he today commit to no new tax?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take my honourable Conservative colleagues at face value when they say that they care and want to show compassion to Canadians, but when they've had the opportunity over the past 8 years, every single time they have voted against Canadians. Whether it was the Canada Child Benefit that has helped lift 450,000 children out of poverty that they voted against. Whether it was lowering taxes on the middle class that helped millions of Canadians across this country, they voted against. Whether it was the Canada Workers Benefit that helps low-income Canadians stay in the workforce, they voted against. Mr. Speaker, I'd like them to show that compassion.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lisle, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, everything costs more these days. Successive interest rate hikes have caused mortgage payments to double in Canada. A family of 4 would have to pay $1,065 more for groceries this year. Heating, energy, food, and even alcohol will continue to get more expensive under this government. After 8 years, this Prime Minister's policies are only making things worse. In tomorrow's budget, will the Prime Minister commit to not imposing any new taxes? Yes or no?
Honourable Secrétaire Parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you'll excuse me if I can't unveil the details of the budget right now, but as a government, well, we will be receiving the budget tomorrow. It will be tabled tomorrow, and I am happy to see everyone being very enthusiastic about tomorrow's budget. In the meantime, I would just say how hard our government worked on this budget to make sure that we will always be there for Canadians.
Honourable député.
Honourable Member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle.
Speaker, as we continue to face increasing global uncertainty, our relations with our friends across the border are now more important than ever. Last week, we welcomed the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to our nation's capital, where he addressed Parliament. Could the Minister of Foreign Affairs update this House on the outcomes of this historic visit and our respected government's commitments with our closest friends and neighbors? Thank you.
Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for an important question. President Biden's visit last week provided an opportunity to make very important announcements. Historic investments in our Great Lakes.
Yes.
Expanding the Safe Third Country Agreement to cover the full border. Additional commitments to NORAD to protect our skies. And creating good jobs, including union jobs, on both sides of the border. When it comes to our closest friend and ally, you can count on this government to get the job done.
The Honourable Member for North Island Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, Veterans Affairs has been clawing back pensions from women RCMP veterans. These women experienced extreme brutality while protecting our country, and the government is denying what they are owed as directed by the Merlo-Davidson lawsuit. New Democrats have been calling for these clawbacks to stop, and after months, finally the minister agrees. These women deserve action. Will the minister apologize to these women, stop the clawback, and reimburse the money they are rightfully owed from their pensions?
The Honourable Minister for Veterans Affairs.
We appreciate the work of the Ombudsman and her office doing, providing the recommendations to government, and thank her for highlighting this issue. The women who came forward and disclosed their experience in the Marlowe Davidson did so with incredible courage. We will contact the veterans who have had their disability pensions reduced by the Marlowe Davidson settlement to give them an opportunity to submit additional information for recalculation and correct the payment if appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, something pretty shocking happened to this place last week. I refer to the statement made by the Honourable Member for Don Valley North. I'm pretty scandalized that anonymous smears from CSIS end up destroying reputations with no real opportunity to respond. It's not like CSIS ever gets anything wrong. Just ask Maher Arar. What the heck is going on here? And will an inquiry find out who in CSIS thinks it's okay to leak to the media? It's wrong.
The Honourable Minister for Interparliamentary Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we have said from the beginning that our government takes these issues of foreign interference very seriously. And Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Minister from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government has said we have consistently taken these issues of foreign interference seriously. We have put in place a series of robust steps. We also think that this discussion merits a non-partisan, fact-based focus. And that's why we think, Mr. Speaker, the appointment of the Right Honourable David Johnston offers all of us an opportunity to look at the issues, to have a fact-based conversation about what additional steps our government can take. That's the best way, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that this process has integrity. Absolutely. And that's the process that we're going to be following.
Absolutely. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for question period today. It being 3:12, pursuant to order made on Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the House will now proceed to the taking of deferred recorded division on the motion at second reading of stage of